Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Reread channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing Theon 6, A Clash of Kings. We only have 4 chapters left in A Clash of Kings, and Theon is definitely a banger finale for him specifically. And Theon 6 also kind of serves as a conclusion to some of Bran's storyline as well, which is what makes Theon 6 so interesting, because in a lot of ways, when Theon actually starts invading the North with the Greyjoy forces, he in a lot of ways takes over Bran's storyline, and he gets the best parts of it because, well, Theon is just a more interesting POV at this point of the story than Bran is. Honestly, I should just say Theon's a more interesting character in general because as the two characters go on, Theon is still more interesting. And so all the northern politics that I enjoyed with Bran's chapter can be explored through Theon, which is, I think, far more interesting, and it kind of explodes in this chapter where everything kind of pays off and ends and a neatly, well, depressing bow for Theon. And Theon 6, I wasn't sure where I was going to rank it in my chapter rankings, which are basically cemented at this point, given there's only a couple chapters left. I have Theon just outside of my top 10 for his last chapter, but a very good one. So let's dive into Theon 6, A Clash of Kings, on page 690. Maester Luwin comes to Theon when the first scouts are seen outside of Winterfell's walls and urges him to yield. Theon, exhausted from another sleepless night, feels sick at the sight of the breakfast brought to him. There has been no reply from his uncle or from his father on Pike. At this point, Theon is being overwhelmed by the stress that he's likely going to die in the coming days. He's getting no support from the Ironborn. The castle and the people of it seem to be throwing him out. The old gods look down on him. And now, finally, the arrival of overwhelming forces seems to be condemning Theon to death. Theon demands that more ravens be sent, despite Luwin warning it would serve no purpose. In anger, Theon knocks aside the platter of food, rises from Ned Stark's bed naked, and accuses Luwin of wanting him dead. Now, this is an interesting point, because we're going to get into basically who does Luwin serve? What is Luwin's purpose at Winterfell, and where do his loyalties truly lie? And I think the interesting part here for Theon is Theon throughout this chapter realizes he's going to die. He knows this is the end. He cannot beat the northern forces that are going to be outside of his walls. But by him saying, send their birds and try to get messages to his father and Victarion, it's more Theon trying to find some hope in this situation, that if they can just hold out for a couple days or maybe even a week, and that's enough time for some Greyjoys to relieve the castle, he might live. It's trying to find some way, even in a desperate situation, that they can survive. Luwin calmly states that his order serves the realm, but Theon challenges him, asking whom he truly serves. Luwin replies that he serves the realm and Winterfell. This is the interesting part of it, is because the Maesters are so mysterious on who they're actually working for. Are they working towards the lord of the castle they've been assigned? Are they working for the family that they had initially been assigned to? So in this scenario, is Luwin loyal to the Starks? Is that where his loyalties lie? Do his loyalties lie with Theon, who is now currently controlling the castle? Or does his loyalties lie with maybe the Order of the Maesters? And there is the question that really will incite the Maester conspiracy a little bit later on in the series. And also, it's interesting because with Cresson as well, we get a nice look into the Maesters and the idea that Cresson basically goes against Stannis. He quite literally goes and does the exact opposite thing Stannis would have wanted, which would have been breaking his vow to the lord that he's supposed to be serving under. And so it's interesting because Theon, I think, is right to assume this, to assume that Luwin doesn't actually serve him, that he's serving the Starks or whatnot. And it's interesting because Theon will be involved in more Maester talk with Barbary Dustin in Book 5. Luwin reminds Theon that he once taught him sums, letters, history, and warcraft, and would have taught him more had Theon wished to learn. But Luwin says he does not bear Theon great love, but cannot hate him either. He affirms that while Theon holds Winterfell, he is oath-bound to give him counsel, and Luwin again advises Theon to yield. It's smart counsel from Luwin. There really is no other option at this point. And Theon is pretty screwed. There's no real way of getting out of this with his head. At this point, for Theon, it really is about how are you going to die? Are you going to get a quick death, or is it going to be something a lot more painful? Is he going to be tortured? And so that's really what Theon might be thinking about at this point, which Luwin is going to offer an alternative. Now, that won't happen until a little later in the chapter because they have two separate conversations. In the show, they kind of combine that conversation with Luwin and Theon, which makes a lot of sense. And they also go a lot deeper in the show in terms of certain aspects. And then in the book, it's also done a little bit differently. So we'll talk about that when we get to their second conversation. But also, I think it's interesting because Luwin is saying he doesn't hate Theon the way all these other people do. And I think a lot of that is biased because Luwin kind of would view Theon as almost another pupil, another son of his, because he kind of views the Stark children as kind of his own family. He's kind of been like their mentor, somebody that he's watched them all grow. And so Luwin kind of views Theon as like maybe his troubled child or his troubled student as we get into page 691. Theon picks up a cloak from the floor, shakes it clean, and drapes it over his shoulders, wanting a fire, clean clothes, and refusing to die in dirty garments. Maester Luwin tells him he has no hope of holding Winterfell, and that if Balon Greyjoy intended to send aid, he would have done so already. And that's the point. Theon has had Winterfell for a good amount of time now. If he meant to actually hold the castle, men would have been sent. Asha was basically sent in the last chapter to tell Theon, no aid is coming. If you stay here, you will die here. And that's what Theon is kind of, he's kind of already realized it in his last chapter, but it's sinking even further in now that there's no help coming. Luwin explains that Balon's true concern is the neck, and the battle for the north will be fought at Moat Cailin. But Theon argues that by holding Winterfell, he prevents Ser Rodrik and the Stark bannermen from marching south to attack his uncle. He claims to have enough food to withstand a year-long siege. Luwin counters there will be no siege, predicting the attackers will scale the walls quickly and take the castle within the hour. And Luwin's completely right. Theon is smart to understand that the North cannot allow Winterfell to be taken by the Greyjoys. If they do that, it is a complete insult onto not just the Starks, but also the Northmen. And so taking it back is clearly the first priority before taking Moat Cailin. And the other part of this is Theon is kind of right in the idea that if Winterfell could hold out for a long period of time, it would relieve any stress that Victarion might face from the north and from any of the directions that are not south. Because, like we've talked about, Moat Cailin is a very good and defensible position from any invader from the south, but from the north, it's not as great. It was never meant to repel northern forces. It was meant to repel southern forces. And so it's, again, another oversight by the Greyjoys, because if Ramsay had not betrayed the North and all that kind of stuff, and the North were just allowed to continue taking Winterfell, gathering men as they moved south, Moat Cailin would have fallen fairly easily, especially when Robb would have been coming north if the Red Wedding hadn't happened. So again, I just want to point that out. The Greyjoys are very stupid. Luwin advises Theon to open the gates and ask for mercy. Theon rejects the idea of mercy, asserting his identity as Ironborn, and dismisses Luwin's counsel. Now, Theon is thinking through a couple things right here. Why would you not want to surrender? Well, one, you would lose all of the respect. Any type of pride Theon might have is going to be gone. His father, Victarion, the Greyjoys, will look at him like a weakling, even though he captured Winterfell by himself. It would destroy his reputation, and that's what this book's been all about for Theon, his identity, but more importantly, his pride, his reputation, the things that won't let him leave Winterfell, that really were the front of Theon in his last chapter with Asha, is that pride of not being able to let go of his prize in Winterfell. And he wants to be a Stark, and he's not even admitting it, and that's why he takes Winterfell. And I think that's really important here, but also the idea is, just from a practical sense, Theon is believed to have killed Bran and Rickon. He's not escaping this without dying. Like, the only thing Theon can really ask for here is that he's not tortured. And maybe if he surrenders, he wouldn't. But again, that's what Theon is thinking about. Theon orders more ravens sent to summon Lauren and Wex and commands his mail to be cleaned and calls for the garrison to assemble. Luwin hesitates, almost wanting to defy him, but ultimately bows and obeys. The assembled Ironmen are few in number within the large yard. Theon tells them Ser Rodrik Cassel and the northern lords will arrive before nightfall. He declares he will not flee and intends to hold Winterfell, living or dying as Prince of Winterfell. He states he will not command any man to die with him and gives them the chance to leave before the main force arrives. Drawing his sword, he marks a line in the dirt and asks those willing to stay and fight to step forward. In a lot of ways, this is the speech we saw in the show, just done very, very differently, as Theon is trying to rally his men to try and put up one last valiant defense worthy of songs and all that kind of stuff. No one moves or speaks as the men stand silent and still, and for a moment Theon thinks that everyone has abandoned him. His father, his uncles, his sister, and even Reek have forsaken him. He questions in his mind, why would his men be any more loyal? These men have yet to really respect Theon, but what will they do? He stands beneath the castle walls with sword in hand, waiting. As we get into page 692, Wex is the first to step across the line and stands beside Theon. And in a lot of ways, this might have shamed some of the other men. If Wex, a mute, a young guy, is willing to fight and die with Theon, they should as well. And this then follows with Theon's men backing him as well. Black Lauren, Red Rolf, Crom, Werlag, Timor and his brothers, Ulf III, Harrog, a sheep stealer, 4 Harlaws, 2 Botleys, and finally Kenned the Whale. 17 men in total choose to remain. But the men that had come with Asha, they do not step forward and they choose to leave. And obviously these men were not responsible for taking Winterfell. They don't really want to be here in general. They are going to fall back to Deepwood Mott, and I don't blame them whatsoever. Theon tells those leaving to go to his sister Asha, saying she will welcome them. Stig appears ashamed, the others depart silently. And you can understand for these men, on one hand, you might be feeling like, we should be fighting with Theon, we should be fighting the Northmen, but at the same time, this is a doomed cause. Save your life for another chance of being able to fight and actually win the battle. Theon orders the 17 who stayed back to the walls and says he will remember them if they survive. Black Lauren warns that the castle folk will turn on them once the fighting begins. Even though there's not many men left in Winterfell because of, a lot of these men have gone south to fight or they've been executed once Theon took the castle, they're still going to turn on them. Whether they can take over a gate, again, you only have 17 men, you're not going to be able to defend everywhere. And so these people could easily try and help open the gate. They could help take out a couple guards while they're distracted. The people of Winterfell now become a big hazard because of the way Theon has ruled here. Lauren suggests killing all the castle inhabitants to prevent betrayal, but Theon refuses and asks if the noose is ready. Theon has a plan, and it's not to massacre its people. Regardless of what you think Theon is as a person, he's not this extremely cruel guy like Maegor the Cruel that would put everybody in this castle to the sword. Does he do a lot of actions that are really misguided and are terrible? Yes. But I don't think he's that far, especially even this plan where he's going to basically use Ser Rodrik's daughter against him. Even then, he's not sure if he actually wants to go through with hanging her. Lauren proposes instead to stand on the drawbridge with his axe and hold off the attackers alone. Theon decides they will use the noose, noticing that Lauren is visible with contempt. Lauren and a lot of these Greyjoy men that stayed back realize their death is coming, so they want to die, heroically. They want to die in battle. They don't want to have to use hostages and delay the inevitable. They basically want to die with axe in hand or whatever weapon they use and fight to the death. Wex helps arm and armor Theon in ringmail, boiled leather, and black surcoat with golden mantle. Theon climbs the watchtower to observe the approaching northern host. The Northmen spread out to encircle Winterfell, numbering at least 1,000, possibly 2,000, against Theon's 17. The attackers have brought catapults, scorpions, but no siege towers are visible. But if they did want to build them, which they don't need to, there's only 17 men, they can do exactly what Theon did, just grapple the walls or whatnot. Theon doesn't have the men to watch everywhere on the wall. It could easily be taken. And so that's what Theon realizes. There isn't really any hope of victory, especially now that he has seen the opposing force. Through Lewin's Mirish lens, Theon identifies banners of Kerwin, Tallhart, White Harbor, Flint, Karstark, and Hornwood, but he notices the absence of a couple houses, the Glovers, Boltons, and Umbers. Really what Theon is realizing is that the North is not fully united against taking him out of Winterfell. Most of the houses are, I don't know if I should say most, but a good amount of the more major houses like Manderley and Karstark are against him. But that does beg the question, where are the Dreadfort men? Where are they at? And we'll see them here in this chapter. Clay Kerwin then approaches the gate under a peace banner to announce that Ser Rodrik Cassel wishes to parley with Theon Turncloak. As we get into page 693, Theon is not happy of being called a Turncloak, recalling that he had gone to Pike intending to lead his father's longships against Lannisport. But for Theon, he's not willing to admit he betrayed the Starks. He was sent to the Greyjoys and the Iron Islands as a Stark messenger, and he's now betrayed them, and then even taken their home. He announces he will come out alone to parley, and Black Lorne warns that truces between knights may not protect one deemed an outlaw, and says only blood can wash out blood. He's really pointing to the idea that Theon is so hated that these men that normally would be honorable might not be so honorable against him and might just outright kill him. Theon insists he is Prince of Winterfell and heir to the Iron Islands, ordering Loren to carry out his prior command. Loren responds with a murderous look and addresses him as Prince. Theon has really lost these men, and he's lost them for a while. These men do not respect him. They look down upon him in a lot of ways. And at that, Theon realizes Loren has turned against him and feels abandoned and friendless within Winterfell. In a lot of ways, Theon is kind of coming to the idea that he's going to die alone. No one cares about him. No one loves him. He has no family. He's completely isolated. Possibly one of the worst ways you could ever die is knowing that nobody will give a shit. That's what Theon's realizing. Theon concludes that his only choice is to live. Wearing his crown, Theon rides to the gatehouse. The castle inhabitants watch him with concealed hatred and sullen expressions. The drawbridge is lowered, and Theon rides out alone into a cold wind, steadying himself. He passes beneath the wall, and he senses the presence of the murdered miller's boys whose bodies were displayed. Ser Rodrik Cassel waits in the market square with Clay Kerwin bearing a Stark direwolf banner. Though Rodrik and Kerwin stand alone, northern forces surround the area. Archers on rooftops, spearmen nearby, and mounted knights of House Manderly present. Theon regrets that he and Rodrik must meet as foes, but Rodrik says his only regret is that he must delay hanging him. Rodrik calls him Theon Turncloak again. Theon asserts he is a Greyjoy of Pike and not a Stark, and this goes to the heart of the issue for Theon. He's so twisted between both of these two families. He's grown up being a Stark, understanding their values and wanting to be one, but in reality, he's a Greyjoy. But when he goes back to the Iron Islands, he's basically an outcast. His father condemns him for every little thing, and he favors Theon's sister Asha. Theon is in an identity crisis in which he doesn't know the answer to who he should be. Rodrik reminds him he was raised for 10 years as a ward of House Stark, and Theon calls himself a hostage and a prisoner. Rodrik says Ned Stark raised him alongside his sons, and that he himself trained Theon in warfare, regretting not killing him instead. And that's the issue, is both sides can be right and wrong at the same time, because on one hand, Theon has every right to feel like he was a prisoner, he was a hostage, whether he was treated nicely or not. If it ever came to the fact that Balon Greyjoy rebelled again, Ned would be called to kill Theon. Theon was also never treated as an equal. He was condemned by Catelyn. He was even at times condemned by Robb. And so Theon is not somebody that should be going, oh, wow, thank you for all this stuff. Now, yes, Theon, on the flip side of things, from the northern side of things, was treated quite well. He was treated better than most wards. He was brought up to be just like a Stark. The problem is you can only do so much while also keeping him as a prisoner. That's what he was. And so I do sympathize with Theon quite a lot, even though I think Theon is very misguided and his actions are not great, especially in this book. As we get into page 694, Theon states he came to parley, not to endure insults, and asks Ser Rodrik what he wants. Ser Rodrik demands two things, Winterfell and Theon's life. Rodrik orders Theon to command his men to open the gates and lay down their arms. He promises freedom for those who did not murder children, but says Theon will be held for King Robb's justice. Theon claims Robb will never see Winterfell again and will fail at Moat Cailin, asserting that the Ironborn now hold the North. And this is a little bit of cope for Theon, of course, because he has to back the Greyjoy claim at this point. But the problem you have is, if Theon does die here, what stops Rodrik from getting more and more men and just attacking Moat Cailin from the north, where it will fall? It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so at this point, Robb's campaign is still looking okay. It's just the things that happen in this chapter, the things that happen, earlier in this book, or even in the next book, are going to cause Robb's downfall. But this is a nice bit of foreshadowing. Theon says Robb will never see Winterfell again, and he is telling the truth. Robb will never see Winterfell again. But also looking at the offer Rodrik gives, there's not a lot here for Theon. Like, what is Theon supposed to say here in terms of, oh, so I'm going to die even if I yield peacefully? And the other part of it is, like, Rodrik doesn't specify, is Theon going to be tortured or is he just going to be executed for his crimes? And that's the issue that you have if you're Theon. Like, what is the benefit? Yeah, you can save some of your men, but all these men hate you already anyway, so what's the point if you're Theon? Rodrik then replies the Greyjoys only hold 3 castles, and he intends to retake Winterfell very soon. And the other one is Deepwood Motte, which isn't all that important to the north. But yeah, if Rodrik takes back Winterfell, he is now free to either go at Moat Cailin or to go at Deepwood Motte. Both he could theoretically win. So right now, the north will be retaken, it's going to take a while. Theon, in return, offers terms. The northern forces must disperse by evenfall. Those who swear fealty to Balon Greyjoy and recognize Theon as Prince of Winterfell will keep their rights and lands unharmed. Those who refuse will be destroyed. And at this is an outrageous claim. Theon has very little leverage. He has 17 men. He just can't back up these claims, albeit he's going to try. Clay Kerwin questions Theon's sanity, and Rodrik calls Theon vain and says he has nearly 2,000 men, while Theon has no more than 50. And in truth, Theon doesn't even have that many. Theon signals Black Lauren by raising his fist, indicating a prepared action. Ser Rodrik sees something on the walls of Winterfell and reacts with visible fear. Rodrik calls Theon's actions craven and despicable for using a child in such a manner. Theon compares it to his own experience as a 10-year-old taken from his father as a hostage. And so what's really interesting here is Theon's only real leverage is he has the people of Winterfell, people that Rodrik cares about. But the problem is Rodrik already was prepared for this. He knew this was a possibility, and given what Theon has done, his actions in the past, he shouldn't be surprised that he's using innocence against Rodrik. And the other part of this I think is very interesting is Theon kind of compares this to himself. This is what Theon was his entire life. If Balon Greyjoy ever stood up or did any of this stuff, this would be Theon, not Rodrik's daughter. Theon would be the one being hanged or whatnot. And I think it's so great because it is how Theon would have felt for a lot of his time there. That Ned Stark always looked at him in this weird way. He could never really get close to Ned because of that idea that Ned might have to kill him at some point. And it is still horrible that Theon is using a child and he's trying to bargain with that. But as we're going to find out later on, even Theon himself, he doesn't know if he can even do it. He's not fully set on actually this action. He doesn't know if he's actually going to be able to follow through with it. And so I think that's the important part. But there's a lot of really nice symbolism in this chapter. Rodrik insists the situations are not the same, but Theon says the metaphorical noose he wore as a hostage chafed him raw, acknowledging the emotional truth of his resentment. And this gets us into page 695, but it gets to the core of the issue. That Theon never really felt accepted with the Starks because of who he was and because of who his father was. So I think a really nice moment there from George. Some of his better writing and why I think a lot of us love Theon in A Dance with Dragons. It's because of moments like this. As we get into page 695, Ser Rodrik insists no harm was ever done to Theon. And Theon begins to say no harm will come to Beth Cassel if Rodrik complies. But Rodrik interrupts. Rodrik calls Theon viper and child killer, saying he offered him a chance to die with honor, but Rodrik reaches for his sword, declaring he should kill Theon immediately. And there's a lot here. So firstly, Theon wasn't ever harmed physically. That is correct. But the idea is that Theon has been harmed because he's been taken from his family at such a young age. He has mentally kind of been harmed. And I don't want to say Theon's a full victim because Theon made his own actions and all that kind of stuff. But Theon is such an understandable character. And it's why I really love him on rereads, because he's one of the most human characters I think George has in this story. Theon starts to recognize his danger, not only because Rodrik is threatening him, but because of the surrounding archers and knights if violence breaks out. He threatens that if Rodrik breaks his oath and kills him, Beth will be hanged. Rodrik, in rage, removes his hand from his sword and laments that he has lived too long. Theon asks again if Rodrik will accept his terms. And at this, Theon is hoping, but it's a blind hope. He knows what his fate is going to truly be. As Rodrik states, he has a duty to Lady Catelyn and House Stark. Theon reminds him that Beth is the last of his bloodline, and Rodrik offers himself in Beth's place as a hostage, arguing that the Castellan of Winterfell is worth more than a child. And in a lot of ways, he is right. Like, Rodrik has more prestige, he's more valuable, but in terms of the situation, Theon is right to assume Beth Cassel is much more valuable to Rodrik, and that'll maybe delay the Northern forces by even maybe a couple hours, a day, thinking about what they can do to try and avoid this. Maybe Theon will surrender. And so that's the point of where we are right now. And it's so interesting because in a lot of ways, this chapter reminds me a lot of Jaime and the Blackfish and their meeting at Riverrun in A Feast for Crows. And it's just got the same similar vibes. Everything that makes that chapter really great is kind of also present here. It's even more personal given Rodrik Cassel knew Theon for so many years personally. And the situation that it's come to is, even in war, the children are the ones always suffering the consequences. It's always the innocents that suffer. Theon refuses, stating Rodrik is not more valuable to him or to the Northern Lords. He declares he will keep Beth safe so long as Rodrik obeys, saying her life is in Rodrik's hands. Theon threatens that if the Northern host remains before the gates at sunset, Beth will hang, followed by another hostage at dawn and dusk each day until they withdraw. He returns to Winterfell without waiting for a reply. As he rides back, he sees the flayed and tarred heads of the miller's boys displayed on the spikes, with Beth Cassel bound and noosed between them. He gallops across the drawbridge into the castle yard. In a lot of ways, Theon is seeing his crimes. Everything that he has done is on full display for the North. Every reason that they have to hate him is there for them to see. Theon tells Blacklorn the threat may delay the attack and that they will know by sunset. He orders Beth be taken inside and kept safe until then. Sweating beneath his armor, Theon asks for wine. As we get into page 696, a fire is lit in Ned Stark's bedchambers. Theon sits beside it, drinking a sour, red wine from the castle's vaults. He believes Ser Rodrik will ultimately attack despite loving his daughter as duty and honor bind him. The thing we always talk about in this story is the heart at conflict, and unfortunately Rodrik is not one of those men that's going to be swayed by his daughter's life at risk. He has a duty to do, and he's going to follow through regardless of what the consequences, unfortunately, might be. Theon even reflects that if he were the hostage and Balon commanded outside, the Ironborn would have already attacked. It just goes to show that Theon realizes his father could not care less about him. He doesn't give a shit about him. And honestly, if Theon was hanged, but Balon got a castle, for instance, Balon would probably consider that to be a win at this point of his life. And that's the really sad part of Theon's life. His one real father figure in Ned Stark died, and Balon, who is his actual father, is maybe one of the worst human beings in this world. Theon finally acknowledges Winterfell will fall if assaulted, despite his 17 men potentially killing several times their number. They have the defensible position, so let's say these 17 men kill, if they're lucky, 80 men on the assault. It still will not be nearly enough. He broods on the injustice of his situation, recalling riding beside Robb Stark in the Whispering Wood. He contrasts fighting among friends with facing death alone and despised. And it's Theon not taking accountability for his actions, not realizing that every decision Theon has made has led him to here. Theon could have helped Robb and told him of Balon Greyjoy's invasion. Theon could have just not taken Winterfell, not tried to do all the things he does at Winterfell. He could have fled Winterfell, but no, he's made his bed, now he must lie in it. And the other part of that is, it's so much easier to go into a battle surrounded by people that care about you, that will die at your side, than going into a battle where you're friendless, there's no love in your life, and you're going to die alone, and possibly you won't ever really be remembered. There will be no songs written about Theon who took Winterfell. Finding no comfort in wine, Theon has Wex bring him his bow and goes to the inner ward. He repeatedly practices archery, shooting until his shoulders ache and his fingers bleed. He remembers saving Bran's life with the same bow and wishes he could save his own. It's interesting that George brings up him saving Bran, because one of the moments that Theon gets condemned, at least in the story that we hear, is actually this moment where Robb scolds him for putting Bran's life at risk, and it could have easily killed him. And it's one of those moments where if you're Theon, you're sitting here going, I just saved your brother's life. That was an impossible decision. There wasn't many good options, and I took the one that I felt like was the best. And yes, we understand Robb's side of that as well. He could have almost killed Bran, but you do gotta admit, Theon saved Bran's life. And things like that are the crux of why Theon betrays Robb in a lot of ways. But also, Theon's in a moment where nothing can solve the pain that he's in right now, the idea of him dying, and he goes to the one thing that can settle him down, archery. The women at the well avoid him, unsettled by his expression. The broken tower casts a lengthening shadow over him as the sun moves, symbolically enclosing him. He considers that hanging Beth will provoke immediate attack, but sparing her will reveal his threats are hollow. And this is the problem. Theon came up with a plan, but at this moment, he's just not really willing to carry it out. He doesn't know what to do. He feels trapped, and every decision he makes is the wrong one. He concludes there is no escape from his predicament. He's going to die. But at this, we get the second part of the conversation between Luwin and Theon. And like I said in the show, they combined these conversations, and it kind of follows this conversation more than the first one. But Maester Luwin approaches and suggests that with 100 archers like Theon, the castle might be held. But unfortunately, they don't have that many. Theon tells Luwin to leave, rejecting further counsel. But Luwin asks whether Theon has had enough of life as well. Theon raises his bow and threatens to shoot Luwin if he speaks another word. But as we get into page 697, we know that's not the case. Even though Theon has been twisted and corrupted, Luwin still means something to Theon. Theon was raised in a lot of ways by Luwin. And Luwin is in the same idea of he understands who Theon is. He knows Theon won't kill him. Luwin tells Theon he will not shoot him and claims to be his last hope. Theon insists he will not run, and Luwin proposes that Theon take the Black and join the Night's Watch. He explains that Ser Rodrik, loyal to House Stark and friendly to the Watch, would allow it if Theon surrenders and accepts terms. Theon considers that joining the Watch would mean no crown, wife, or children, but it would mean life and honor. Now, this is interesting because we're going to see this played out 2 times, really, from this book and then also the next book, with Theon and Tyrion specifically. You could also say Ned, but with Ned, it wasn't necessarily contemplating if the Watch would be a good life. It was more about, does he lie? Does he give up his honor and things that he believes to be right to spare himself, to try and protect Sansa, and then going to the Watch? So it's a different context here with Theon and also Tyrion in the next book. It's the idea of there is life. We can live on. We can keep going. We don't have to die here. And it's so interesting because in the book, Theon does really contemplate going to the Night's Watch. He's about to go there until he's interrupted. In the show, it's never that. Now, what I think is interesting in the show, that I think is a good point that the book doesn't bring up, is that if Theon did go to the Wall, Jon Snow might actually kill him. Genuinely. And so that's something in the show that they use to be oh, Theon's not actually going to go to the Wall. He's not going to go to the Night's Watch because he fears Jon. The book, it never really gets that far in terms of contemplation about it, because Theon thinks about it. He genuinely thinks it's a good idea until it isn't. But Theon does reflect that Ned Stark's brother and Jon Snow both chose the Watch, and Ned himself chose it as well, and so it must be a pretty honorable life. Theon imagines rising high within the Watch, possibly becoming Lord Commander, serving at Eastwatch, commanding a ship, hunting beyond the Wall, and even taking wildling women to his bed. And this is all things that happen at the Watch. And Theon is somebody that kind of fits into a lot of the men at the Watch. I think he would have been assigned to Eastwatch, of course, because of his ability to, handle a ship or whatnot, his status as being an Ironborn. We know Cotter Pike, for instance, he controls Eastwatch. So there is a very good path for someone like Theon to gain power and influence and control at somewhere like the Watch. He concludes that a black cloak cannot be turned and that he could be as good as any man. Crom interrupts those, shouting that the Northmen are fighting. Theon fears the castle is under attack as Luwin urges him to raise a peace banner while there is still time. And this is a very confusing moment. Who is attacking? Is it the Northmen attacking the castle, or is it something else? Is it actually infighting? Crom explains that additional Northmen arrived and appeared to join Ser Rodrik's host, but instead attacked them. Theon briefly wonders if Asha has come, but Crom denies it. Crom reports the new force bears the banner of the flayed man. Theon realizes it is House Bolton of the Dreadfort. And this is the other thing that drops. When we look at Robb's campaign, we looked at Arya's chapter and how the Boltons were becoming increasingly distant from House Stark, and this is them betraying them. And when we get to Theon's chapter, it's so clever because now you see the Boltons even betraying other Northmen in the north. They are taking this time to advantage themselves and to take out a large resistance force against them. Theon goes to the battlements with Lune, and outside the gates the market square is filled with dead men and dying horses amid chaotic fighting. Though Ser Rodrik's forces seem more numerous, the Dreadfort men are better led and have taken them by surprise. What does this remind you of? The Red Wedding. The Boltons don't necessarily have as many men as Robb has overall, but yet the Red Wedding still goes off without a hitch without losing all that many men. The same is true for Ramsay. As we get into page 698, Theon watches the Bolton forces repeatedly charge and break apart Ser Rodrik's larger host as it attempts to regroup between the houses. He hears the clash of iron axe heads on wooden shields and the scream of wooden horses as the inn is burning. Black Lorne joins him on the battlements as the sun sets, casting the scene in red light. A wounded soldier crawls towards the well in the market square, bleeding out, and dies before reaching it. The man has no badge, so they're not sure which side he's on. Crows gather as evening falls, and stars appear. Theon recalls that the Dothraki believe stars are the spirits of the valiant dead, as Lorne dismisses such beliefs as savage foolishness. So at this point, there's a lot of confusion. There's just been a battle outside of Winterfell. Is this good news? Is this bad news? What does this mean for the defenders of Winterfell? As that's what we'll find out here. As darkness and smoke thicken, the sounds of battle fade into moans and wailing. A column of mounted men emerge from the smoke, led by a knight in dark armor with a pale pink cloak. The knight halts outside the gate and calls for it to be opened. Black Lorne demands to know if they are friend or foe. So before we get into this, and we figure out that this is Reek, aka Ramsay, disguised as Reek, I want to say this. If you're Theon, what makes you think that these are actually friends? They just betrayed all of the Northmen, they just bloodied all of them. What makes you now think that with all these more men, they're going to settle for just being servants of Theon? They're still Northmen. And if you even know the history of House Bolton, they've always wanted to be in charge and take down House Stark. So them being your friends is not very likely. Why would they submit to Greyjoy rule or anything like that? That's something you should be thinking about with Theon. But if you're Theon, you're still under the same circumstance. If you say, oh, I'm not opening the gates to you, they can still take your castle. It's the same situation, it's just a different force now. And so Theon is basically just in desperation. He's assuming this might be his only chance, that maybe he's saved, even when there should be thousands of alarm bells going off in his head. The knight's man responds by presenting gifts, and 3 corpses are thrown before the gate. By torchlight, the defenders recognize the bodies as Ser Rodrik Cassel, Leopold Tallhart, and Clay Kerwin. Clay has an arrow through his eye. Ser Rodrik has lost his left arm at the elbow, and Maester Luwin cries out in dismay, turning away and collapsing to his knees in sickness. The knight boasts that Lord Manderly did not come to fight, and Theon realizes he has been saved by the Boltons' intervention. This is where he should realize this is not the case. But despite this victory, or what he considers a victory, he feels empty. This isn't a victory that Theon accomplished. Theon had nothing to do with this outside of sending Reek to go get more men. He had nothing to do with it. He didn't even take part in the battle. And that emptiness is probably Theon's inner conscious telling him something's wrong here. This isn't right. They aren't backing you. Why are they actually here? He reflects on how close he had come to surrendering and taking the black, and how foolish that seems now as we get into page 699. Theon orders the gate opened for the Dreadfort men, hoping for a night free of fearful dreams, to finally be able to sleep, to not worry about dying, to be able to have just a nice meal and enjoy it. The Bolton forces cross the moat and enter Winterfell's yard, many bearing damaged weapons and shield. Theon asks Redhelm how many men they lost, and he replies 20 or 30. Also, by Redhelm, that means Ramsay, just for context for you guys, but in the book, that's kind of what it's described as. Redhelm's armor is fashioned like a flayed, skinless man's face. He explains that Ser Rodrik had 5 times their numbers, but believed them allies. It's very similar to another event, the Red Wedding. Lot of foreshadowing in this chapter to it. Redhelm recounts taking Rodrik's arm when offered a handshake and then revealing his identity. Removing his helm, he reveals himself as the man known as Reek, to Theon anyway. He claims the original Reek is dead, blaming a girl's escape for the failed flight. He describes giving Reek his horse, fine clothes, sword belt, sable cloak, and rings to ride to the Dreadfort for aid. By the time Reek was killed with an arrow, he disguised himself in Reek's rags and filth. And there's a lot to say here. Reek and Ramsay are absolutely just horrible in terms of they were basically chasing down this poor girl. They get caught during the act, and Ramsay more or less throws Reek into, you're going to die as me, and I can pretend to be Reek to try and survive. That was the best chance that he actually had to survive, and it works out pretty darn well. He declares he brought not 200 men as promised, but 3 times as many, including his father's garrison. Theon recalls promising a woman as reward and orders Harag to fetch Palla from the kennels. The man reveals his true identity as Ramsay, calling himself Bolton rather than Snow. Ramsay reacts coldly to being offered a kennel girl as reward, questioning if that is Theon's idea of proper payment. As beginning at page 700, Theon begins to sense the hostility in Ramsay's tone and in the way the Dreadfort men look at him. Theon is realizing something isn't right. It's just clicked a little too late because now he's opened the gates to all of Ramsay's men. There's no chance now. If Ramsay betrays him, it's over. And Theon's kind of realizing that, but he's reacting way too slowly. But Ramsay's basically his origin story is something that Bran's all of his POV chapters set up. And I think it's so funny because even some of Bran's interesting plot points really get wrapped up with Theon. You know, Bran's last chapter, in the last chapter of this book, is kind of a reaction of everything that's happened. It's also like a reveal that Bran is still alive, all that kind of stuff. Albeit Theon's already had that reveal that they're still alive, so that's kind of the thing with Bran, is he kind of loses out on a lot of his big reveals and stuff like that because of Theon's POVs. Ramsay rejects Palla, saying she smells, and demands Theon's own bed warmer, Kyra, instead. Theon angrily refuses and begins to threaten Ramsay when Ramsay strikes Theon across the face with a backhand blow, shattering his cheekbone. Theon collapses in intense pain, later regaining awareness on the ground. And remember, this is not like a backhand like with your hand. He's wearing full armor. You know, you're getting hit with like heavy metal right to your face. That's enough to basically break your jaw, loosen teeth. Again, think about, for instance, the Mountain and Oberyn's fight. Now, Ramsay is not the Mountain, but just think about that to a minor extent here. He attempts to order the gates closed, but it is too late. The Dreadfort men cut down Red Rolf and Kenned as more Bolton soldiers flood into the yard. Chaos erupts as Iron Men are overwhelmed. Black Lorne tries to fight, but is surrounded by 4 attackers. Ulf is killed by a crossbow bolt while running toward the Great Hall, and Maester Luwin is speared through the back by a mounted knight and trampled. A torch is thrown into the stables, setting them ablaze, and everything has gone terribly wrong. Even Maester Luwin, someone we've come to care about and like, he's been killed in this chapter, or well, he's not exactly killed in this chapter, but he's setting the pace for him to die. We have Theon, who looks like he might die at this point, and Winterfell itself is being sacked. Ramsay orders the Freys spared and commands the rest of Winterfell to be burned. Theon's final sight is his horse Smiler escaping the burning stables, mane aflame, screaming and rearing. Theon has lost Winterfell, he's lost his men, and he is either going to die or he's going to be tortured and all that kind of stuff. Now, again, with context of A Clash of Kings, we will not see Theon, at least in this reread, for years. Like, in terms of when I get to A Dance with Dragons, it's going to take years probably. And for a reader back then, A Clash of Kings came out in, I believe, 1998, and we don't get Dance until 2011. So Theon was almost like presumed dead or a prisoner for like 13 years in real life time. It kind of just shows you how much of a cliffhanger we end on here. And Theon's last chapter is just so great because it's a great culmination of everything that's been built up with his character for the entire book. It's also a great culmination of Bran's storyline throughout this book and the big reveal of Ramsay Bolton. It has tons and tons of foreshadowing to what we're going to see in the next book with Robb's campaign. It's just a really awesome chapter. And it's not the conclusion of the northern plot line because we still have Bran. We also still have Jon, who is like the deep north plot line. But still, it's fantastic. I think I have this right now ranked as number 11 in my rankings. I'm not sure if that's going to change with Theon, Jon, or Bran's last chapter, but as of right now, Theon 6 is just such a good chapter. And I do want to give you guys a little bit of an update. So we're getting close to the end of A Clash of Kings. We have 3 chapters left. I want to kind of give you guys a roadmap of what to expect moving forward. So after we finish A Clash of Kings, which should be around mid of March, I'll do 3 extra videos on A Clash of Kings, which will be my POV rankings, ranking all the POV characters of A Clash of Kings. I'll have a video, which is going to be a very big one, ranking every chapter in this book, ranking 1 to my least favorite chapter of the book. And then I will have like a final conclusion video, which will be about the strengths, the weaknesses of A Clash of Kings, things I love about it, why it's my favorite book, kind of some of its legacy, and kind of the public reception to it, what I've seen most people say about A Clash of Kings. And that will conclude our Clash of Kings coverage. It's really sad to me, given it is my favorite book, and we will not be able to cover it anymore. And so that begs the question, when will you hit A Storm of Swords? So A Storm of Swords will probably hit in May or June. I like to give myself a little bit of a break between books to kind of like just refresh myself a little bit, not get burnt out on the reread. So we'll have a little bit of a break. I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to restart it, given it's going to be a very hectic time when House of the Dragon Season 3 starts. But my expectation would be I start the reread probably a little bit before House of the Dragon Season 3 comes back, just to get back into the flow of things. And I'll also have in that gap, I'll just have some of those like podcast videos where I'll take a couple of videos from my channel that correlate to each other and kind of make a little podcast out of it for you guys, so you guys have something to watch for the algorithm, all that kind of stuff. So thank you guys all for watching Theon 6. Let me know what you guys think about Theon's plot or POV in A Clash of Kings. I think of all of the characters that I was reading in this book so far, I would say Theon is like the one that has most improved over rereading. I've enjoyed him a lot more than maybe I did on my first read, and as I've reread the books, I've just enjoyed him more and more. So thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.